Education. Let's talk about how to portray your education on your CV. When you are junior, often the only thing you've got to point to is education. And that's not a bad thing. And when you are applying for an apprenticeship role or a graduate role, look, it's understood there's probably not that much experience to show. That, by the way, can be something to think about, right? Because sometimes if it's just A levels, BTEC, or a standard degree that everybody else has got, then your experience, your other activities, the other things that define you can be really powerful in terms of setting you apart. So for example, if you're applying for a law degree, guess what? Sorry, if you're applying, so for example, if you're applying for a position in law at a law firm, guess what? Everyone applying has got a first, for example, from a good university, right? In law. Okay, so everyone's got that, right? There's a baseline, for example. Then that's where your experience and other aspects can really help define you. Where to put education? Again, if you are a graduate and you're applying for a graduate position, the convention there seems to be you start your CV with education. Start it with education. Reverse chronological order. I do like to see dates on the right. I think that's quite useful if you're a graduate, especially if you're currently studying. It's quite useful to see when you're going to finish, right? So 2024 to 2028, for example, so that kind of thing is useful. Specify the university. Yes, specify the type of degree in the context of universities. But then we don't necessarily need to know the class of your degree, first, 2-1, etc., etc. Some cases in a graduate role, for a graduate application, they're expecting that, right? But as you get more senior in your career, once you've begun your career, your degree, your education very quickly becomes secondary. That's why I typically, on most experienced CVs, I want you to go straight into experience. Okay, anyone that's been in work for a number of years, your education is very quickly becoming less relevant. Okay, so that's why I would start with experience, and then education is usually a secondary section, right? The section after your experience. That's how I like to play it. And it's perfectly fine simply just to list degree, university, right? University, degree. Okay, now you'll see that a lot of graduate students, because they haven't got much to say, right? Correctly or incorrectly, by the way, they'll really major on experience and education. And I often see this where they're filling up space. So they start giving me the different things they did in each semester. I just don't care. Right, now I know I'm being rather blunt there. Just give me the degree, that's great. You can say the type of degree, but for a graduate placement role, we're going to be training you anyway. We're going to give you lots of different experience, rotating around the company, and that's when you're going to learn really what you need. Great, you've done mechanical engineering. Great, you've done philosophy. So this is often the case, right? The degree doesn't necessarily matter, and it's not necessarily defining you from the point of view of the employer. Now, yes, it's very important to you when it's the only major thing. You've got that and Costa, that and working in a pub. Fine, right? This is where it's really important to think about experience, okay? It's very helpful if you can get some experience while you're studying, by the way. Let's move on. So don't overplay education. Look, if you're applying for a doctorate role or a lecturer role or something, then they're going to want the whole detail, right? If you're a scientific individual with lots of dissertations and research papers, clearly that's essentially your experience, right? And no wonder that's coming first. That's what's mattering right. But for the vast majority, education is usually coming secondary, right? Because you've got really good experience to go first, okay? And it's perfectly fine simply just to list them. Now, I'm not showing you a particular style because I don't really think it matters. Just a note on gradings, A-level results, GCSE results. These things are relevant if they're the last thing you've been doing or the second last thing you've been doing, right? So you'll often see that for a graduate role, they are expecting to see your A-level results. Probably not. They might ask, but they probably don't care so much about GCSE. So they're looking for A-level or BTEC or those kind of things. As you get into career, A-levels, I don't care. And I'd go so far as to say when I'm hiring people mid-career, I never. I mean, yes, I'll look at it, and you're using that as a talking point in the interview. Say, oh, I see you went to blah blah blah, but it just doesn't matter. Look, in my view, okay, I don't really care about it. It's circumstantial. It's nice to know. So I certainly, once you're 4 or 5 years into your career, I'm not going, what's this B? A B in maths. Oh, A in maths. Right, by all means, if you've got a first, you can say first. I got a 2-2. I should have been paying more attention. So guess what? On my CV, it simply says University College London, Information Management, BSc. It doesn't say 2-2, right? Because I just don't want to advertise it to anybody. Look, in some cases, if you have a degree with a 2-1, 2-2, etc., if the role and if your stage in career requires it, graduate typically, put it down, right? Because they're probably going to ask. But otherwise, you can drop that stuff. We just don't mind, right? So once you're into career, move on. So if you are mid or senior in your career, you just don't need to be massively emphasizing your education. What will define you, generally speaking, is your experience. Be sensitive on the amount of space you're using for education, especially if you're junior in your career, because we see a lot of people, they put a whole lot of detail in there, and then I can almost feel them. And especially when I'm doing one-to-ones, you can hear them say, oh yes, I filled it up. I filled it up with all the detail about my university courses, all the different, what I did this month and that quarter. I filled it all up. I filled the space. No. Please, experience. Well, I haven't got any experience. Could you go and get some? How am I going to do that? Okay, look, that's a different topic, and I've got a lot of videos on TikTok about that. But you give some thought. Sometimes, if the only thing you've got to talk about is education, fair enough, right? But then, did you do anything at university with societies? Were you a treasurer? Were you a chair? Did you do anything, right, that you can then start putting down as experience, okay, and taking that away, reducing the amount of time that you're spending on education. Usually, because it's typically most organizations are placing their attention on your experience and not so much on your education. So just give some thought to that when you're detailing that out in the CV. Okay, let's move on.